So, Luke Davies, you adapted the two memoirs into Beautiful Boy, written by David and Nick Sheff. It concerns a father and son and their journey and their battle with heroin addiction. It's something that's incredibly personal to you, as I understand it. Can you talk a bit about your own um, how your own experiences informed the writing of this screenplay?
Yes, I mean, I had my own history with and struggles with addiction in my 20s, which as a younger novelist, I kind of transformed into the novel Candy, which after many years of development became the film Candy, which was the third last, I think, film that Heath Ledger made before he died.
Yeah.
And so jump forward 10 years, I'd been living in LA trying to make a go of things as a screenwriter. And these two books, these two memoirs, Beautiful Boy by David Sheff and Tweak by Nick Sheff, came under my nose, so to speak. I was really resistant at first. I was very broke. I needed a job, but I had doubts because I thought, well, I wrote Candy. It was a relationship drama that had drug addiction at the core. This was a little different. This was a father-son anxiety kind of drama about crystal meth addiction. It's, by the way, heroin comes into Nick's story, but it's a lot of it's about crystal meth. And I was resistant, but I read, I met Plan B and really liked those guys. I met Felix von Groningen, the director. He's a wonderful person. We started to collaborate. And at a certain point, I thought, you know what? I think the universe is telling me that I should take this job and investigate this father-son relationship in fiction.
One of the interesting things about this film is because it's based on these two books, you have both the perspective of what it's like to be a drug addict, but also what it's like to be the parent of a drug addict. And I think that, you know, it works in, you know, whether you are the parent or the sibling or the child of someone who's struggling with addiction, you really do get a sense of, you know, a personal experience. You know, can you talk just a bit about, since you had written Candy, can you talk a bit about exploring drug addiction from the perspective of somebody who is, you know, has a loved one that's going through it?
Yeah. Or in the case of this film, it's Steve Carell's character, who he plays David Sheff, the father. You know, he represents the damage that explodes outwards from the central, you know, from the eye of the storm. That is the catastrophe of addiction. And this is a guy, the character David, who is a very alpha kind of character. He's a successful guy in his life, in his career. He's a music writer. In real life, David wrote the last ever John Lennon interview before Lennon was killed, for example.
Oh, wow.
And it's about a guy who comes up against this thing that he doesn't know how to defeat. He's used to winning his battles and conquering things by sheer force of will. And he comes up against this force that has nothing to do with your willpower. And so a lot of the dramatic energy in the film is about the anxiety and anger that the family experiences that surrounding the addict figure. When I wrote Candy, I didn't deal with there's no father character in Candy, the novel, or in the Heath Ledger's character's world in Candy, the film. And that's partly because when I was writing it, it was too overwhelming to deal with, my actual relationship with my father. But the week before I was to have my first meeting with the producers about this film, I received an email from my dad. Philip Seymour Hoffman had died that week. And my dad remembered that 10 years earlier at the Berlin Film Festival, the Candy people and the Capote people had all had dinner together. So Heath Ledger and Philip Seymour Hoffman were at this dinner. And my dad wrote me this email the night before my meeting saying, I suppose you heard about Philip Seymour Hoffman. I remember you telling me the stories about dinner in Berlin. Luke, sometimes I feel this family is so blessed. And it it was a mind-opening moment, like the universe telling me do this, because my dad was not given to talking about the difficult and traumatic memories of the past of my actual life in my 20s as a heroin addict. But it was his way of saying, I get how fragile it is. I get that Philip Seymour Hoffman died last week and that you somehow are still alive. And that was really the turning point for me. Okay, I need to go into this film and explore this world and do this thing that I never did when I was writing Candy, that I now feel better equipped to do, which is paint this canvas of the father-son relationship, the family relationship.
Did you meet with David and Nick before you were, or while you were writing the script?
I met Nick and got to know him quite well. And I did not meet David until the first time we met, which was at the premiere in Toronto. You know, it wasn't necessary to meet either Nick or David, partly because their books are so great that was all we needed, all I felt we needed. There's so much detail and vividness and authenticity in the books. But it was just that Nick lived in LA, so we got to know each other, and David lived in San Francisco, and on the couple of opportunities that we had to meet, he was going to be in LA, but I was out of the country or whatever. It wasn't by design. I'm very glad to have met him now.
Right. I'm curious because, I mean, it's adapting these two books. How did you go about the process of figuring out what to include, what to take out, and in a sense, like blending them together so that they are a cohesive whole?
Yeah, that was always the challenge. Adapting one book is hard enough.
Yeah.
Even at a basic logistical level, you know, a book is 20 hours long and a film is 2 hours long. But the challenge for us was that these were two distinct stories, and we needed to make it feel like one coherent film, two sides of the same coin, or however you want to look at that. In the end, the guiding principle was that this was about the love between the father and the son. Not always unconditional. That love goes through terrible tests and tensions as the catastrophe of Nick's addiction unfolds. But Felix and I, we co-wrote the screenplay. There was a lot of boiling it down, making really difficult calls about scenes that we loved that in the end were discarded just because we didn't have the available space and time to portray them. And not allowing it to be a sort of mad drug-a-log, but spending more time with the family in that realm of fear, anxiety, and anger that swirls about as the narrative unfolds. It was not easy. We had a lot of back and forth until we finally sort of landed on something resembling a shape, a narrative, you know. And then when Felix got in the edit, he further fooled around with the timelines, the time loops. It's not an entirely linear narrative. That's what he did so beautifully also in his film Broken Circle Breakdown, which was nominated for Best Foreign Language Film a few years ago. These grand kind of sweeping circles take you on this journey, and sometimes you have to orient yourself as to where you are, but in the end it pays off.
Right. Was there something that was particularly difficult for you to let go? A scene or a moment, something that you wish you could have found a place for in the film, in the script?
Yeah, there was. I loved in the real chaos of the two books. Nick kind of terrorized and plowed his way through sort of three hugely dysfunctional relationships, not one smaller relationship. And so in the end, because we knew that the film was about the family, the relationship with the character Lauren in the film became a smaller narrative thread than it might otherwise have been. And of course, I hugely regret, or, I'm saddened by the fact that we couldn't have more of the two central women in the film. Um, Nick's birth mother, Vicky, played by Amy Ryan, and his uh, stepmother, Karen, played by Maura Tierney. These are wonderful and rich characters. And again, because the film is about the relationship between the Timothy Chalamet character, Nick, and the Steve Carell character, David, there wasn't available space to let those relationships play out in all their richness. So yeah, I wish there could have been more. If it was a miniseries, sure, those two mother figures would have a greater central role.
Yeah, I guess there's always tough decisions you have to make, and trying for the better, for the greater good, I suppose, of the
Yeah,
film as a whole.
absolutely, for the greater good. To use the cliche, you've got to throw out some of the babies, hopefully not with the bathwater.
Right. We're in the middle of a opioid epidemic. I mean, unfortunately, we're always in the middle of some kind of a drug epidemic, whether it's opioid, heroin, crack, cocaine. I know that you had been, excuse me, working on this film for several years, and working on the scripts a few years before the opioid epidemic became a national news story. But can you talk a bit about the film in the context of that?
Yeah, the news thing goes in cycles, and it wasn't that it suddenly started happening 3 years ago. This high visibility opioid epidemic, it is getting worse. That's true, but I've always been aware that this is constant and relentless, and that it's a huge problem, and not just in North America, kind of, you could say in the Western world at the moment. I'm Australian originally. The same issues are going on there in the UK. And it's what's interesting is that in our experience of releasing the film and doing a lot of screenings, we hear directly from people who keep telling us of how the film touched them because of their own experiences with addiction, whether as the using addicts themselves or as family members. But what we keep discovering is that this is no 6 degrees of separation for anyone. At any given Q&A screening we've done, talking to people, we keep finding out it's never more than 1 degree of separation, that you know someone, that you're close enough to someone to feel the ripples and repercussions of the cyclonic damage that addiction causes in the community. And but yeah, for me, it's a kind of there but for the grace of God go I situation. I was once there. I should be dead, and I'm not, and I feel a lot of gratitude for that. But at the wider level, if our film, we want to make a film that is a compelling and intense drama that succeeds at that level. It also happens that it's touching communities and it's feeding into this dialogue about the opioid epidemic, and we're very happy that that also is happening. If one person gets any kind of inspiration from the film about a life beyond the horizon, okay, that's a good thing.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of us have been there. I mean, either as an addict ourselves, or as someone who knew or knows someone who is. So I think that the movie does a really good job of proving that it's not something that you're having to deal with all by yourself. I mean, it's something that affects many people.
I hope so.
Yeah. Before I let you go, I did want to ask you. Last we talked, it was right before you became an Oscar nominee for Lion, which is based on another memoir about an extraordinary person's journey.
Yeah.
Can you talk just a bit about what that recognition meant for you?
Lion was a beautiful experience. It's one of those experiences in life where the stars line up for everyone. Garth Davis, the director, made an extraordinarily beautiful film. All of us were really so happy to be on the campaign trail, so to speak, for Lion, heading towards Oscar nominations and so on. There was never a moment going to a Q&A for Lion where everybody, including Nicole Kidman and Dev Patel weren't like, I'm so happy to be here. I'm so happy to walk onto this stage. Because with Lion, the audience had been broken open by the screening. And I've got to say, that's a beautiful feeling when you walk out there and you're with a theater full of people who have just had this intensely emotional experience, which you helped create. And yeah, it's changed things for me. It's made me, I was struggling for so many years. I could barely pay the rent. Lion was a real turning point in the sense that the trickle-on effect since then has been that people have wanted to meet me, or that there's been other projects that are floating around that are in the works that I'm working on, and a couple of other jobs that have come to me. In a sense, I'm very aware because of the success of Lion, or because of the way people received Lion in their hearts, I guess, you know, and that includes studio executives. Suddenly it was like, I want to meet the guy who made us cry.
Yeah.
I'm not complaining about that situation.
Well, Luke Davies, thank you so much. Congratulations on another powerful film.
It's a pleasure, Zach. Nice to talk to you again.